Was that? Easy this morning is pretty good, but I think this is the lunch shot that. Yep. Can you hear me? Awesome. And we're connected to the live stream as well. Are we live on YouTube, or I should wait a minute? We're good. Okay. Yeah, PPT. All right. So first, I'll just give a brief introduction to ISA. So we're international, intergovernmental treaty-based international organization. We've got 118 signatory countries after Romania was signed yesterday here itself. Um, we've our journey so far, we've mobilized over $83 million in resources, and we've done 27 demo projects. We've trained over 3,700 people, and we have, well, this is 5 flagship reports, but we have 5 reports released just this year alone, including this one that we're very excited to be launching today. We do programmatic support, supporting countries in various initiatives, from mini grids to rooftop solar to solar parks. And today we're going to be talking about number 8, solar PV battery and waste management. So what we want to do here is create enabling ecosystems for sustainable solar and battery waste management. The idea is to reduce the amount of solar and battery waste, to reuse the components wherever possible, which is something we'll be learning more about today, and to recycle the solar and battery waste as possible. As part of this program, we're pleased to present the Watts to Waste, Exploring India's Solar Waste Landscape, with support from our partner, UN Environmental Program, which has funded this program. So India stands among the top 5 countries with the highest solar PV installations, and there's been consistent capacity additions, and solar is now substantially cheaper than new coal projects. The installed capacity has gone from about 1 gigawatt in 2010 to 63 gigawatts by 2021, and up to about 74 gigawatts today. We've got about 14 gigawatts installations in Rajasthan, and much of this installation is supplied through imports, although that's changing for those of you who were here for this morning sessions. We're expecting substantial additional manufacturing capacity, which means we're going to need a lot of new raw materials and critical inputs, much of which can be recovered from recycling itself. And so this is the key learnings from the report. And for that, I'm going to hand off to, you're looking confused. What's that? This is not the slides you were promised? All right. But yes, okay. So the point I was making about India being dependent on imports for several materials. So, by recovering and recycling, this can actually help solve some of our challenges with the import situation. We're expecting between 2 and 120 kilotons generated in India, and by 2030, it's going to increase based on the regular loss and potentially even more on the early loss scenario. So we've done this waste forecasting exercise, which is a key learning, and we've got key recommendations for states with high solar adoption, such as Rajasthan and Karnataka. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mark Dixon from DSS to present some of the high-level findings.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Dixon. I'm a principal with DSS Plus. We are an organization, management consulting organization, that specialize in industrial operations, industrial safety, and sustainability. Now, one of our centers of expertise within our sustainability practice is the circular economy. And in particular, we have several PhDs who specialize in electronic waste, which is the reason we got involved with this project with the UN Environmental Programme and the International Solar Alliance. It's worth taking a minute just to realize the scale of India's ambition when it comes to solar. By 2030, India hopes to have installed 500 gigawatts of solar capacity. To put that in context, the entire installed capacity of all electricity in the UK is 100 gigawatts. So India aims within 7 years to do 5 times that with solar alone. That's an incredible ambition. So what does that mean in terms of waste? Well, with that level of growth, and there's certainly going to be a large amount of waste materials that come from solar. What are those materials? Obviously, we've got things like frames for aluminium. We've got crystallized silicone in the PV panels, cadmium telluride, another type of PV panel. We've got copper wiring, plastics, etc., etc. So, important thing to remember is there is virtually no recycling capacity in India for these materials. Why is that important? There's also very little manufacturing base either. So there's a great dependence on either importing the components, but there's very little manufacturing base for gathering these raw materials and building those components within India outright. So, one of the important things about solar is there's lots of innovation. They're driving the efficiency of panels through, which means that there is a certain element of replacement, which means that solar panels don't necessarily last as long as you think they're going to last. There's a tendency to replace them for the next best efficient panel. So that in itself is going to drive up waste just through replacement. There's also a lack of regulation at the minute. There are lack of incentives for recycling. But at the same time, this presents an enormous opportunity for investors. So the best way forward is a recycling or a recycling management capability within the country. And with that typically goes a set of regulations to do with recycling, setting KPIs, setting targets around critical materials would certainly help. Um, looking at the sector and looking at incentives to recycle and encouraging investors in the sector would also help. And also encouraging the willingness. So just not disposing of solar panels on the waste heap once they're finished with, but actually getting the message out there that there are incentives for proper disposal. So our report simply looks at the scale of waste, looks at the gaps in the current ability to regulate and manage that sector, and suggests a way forward, and a series of opportunities for investors in this space to bring the recycling technology to India, for India itself to recover these critical materials and not rely so heavily on imports, which is all of this is going to be required. If you're going to install 500 gigawatts of solar capacity, you're going to need a manufacturing base and you're going to need to start thinking about the value chain and where these critical materials come from. So, if you want to know anything about recycling PV materials, please come speak to DSS. Only happy to help. I've covered most of that. Thank you.
All right, so I think we're still waiting for the physical reports to get here, or did they get here? We're still waiting. Okay. No, I'm seeing thumbs up though. They are here. We're a very just-in-time organization here. Reduces your waste to the seven S's. Exactly. Um, but I'd like to invite to Mark and Dr. Mather to come up to officially kind of launch the report. Yeah. Can you go get Dr. Mather? And then Raj, in the meantime, if you want to put up our nice, beautiful, yes, we have got a nice infographic. There you go. That's why you had extra slides. There you go. Thanks so much, Raj. Okay. And I did want to note that we had UNEP send their regards. They weren't able to make it, but they were very excited about this report, and we're very pleased to see the hard work that had gone in by DSS and through ISA. So here's your copy. Dr. Mather is here. Yes, he is. Okay. Here's your copy. Lovely. Finally. Okay. How are you? Wonderful. Finally, there he is. Is this okay? Then I'm so glad that you are here. One more. He's done this before. He's very good at that. Did you want to say a few words, Dr. Mather? Yeah.
Listen, I don't want to take up too much time, but one of the things I do want to say is that I'm absolutely delighted that we have had the opportunity to release the report and, more importantly, to discuss the way forward. Why? Because it is amazingly important. I don't need to say the things about the tons of solar waste which can go into landfills otherwise. I take it for granted that all of us are converts. The problem that I see is that the solar panels of today are very different from the solar panels of 25 years ago. And I think we can easily expect that the panels of 25 years from now will be very different from those of today. So what? Problem is if you recycle them, if you recycle today's panel, which will end life 25 years later, if you recycle it today, you will get material which is of no good to anybody. So I can't figure out what the panels of 25 years later will look like. But what I can figure out is that if you separate out all the elements in the panels, we can move to a future where that material will be available for repurposing in new panels or for anything else. Right? If this is the case, then we need standards now so that people making cells today make it such that they are dismantleable, that they are separable. I would very much like to see us, UNEP and us cooperate in this. I would like to bring ISO on board. Obviously, the industry is a major partner. How this will happen, Dave, we will count on you. Your larger your larger group of expertise will obviously tell us what is possible and what is not. But in keeping with the way the panels are, the growth of the demand for panels, we need to do this soon. I would therefore, this is completely apart from what we are talking. I would very much like to create a coalition where we start focusing on the opportunities that are provided by both the separation of the various materials that go in, but as well as by the opportunities that are created by the new manufacturing technologies that are put in place. For example, if we talk of the manufacturing technologies that will be used for building integrated PV, so a wall, an outside wall, if it could be used as a solar generation, well, that's great. But I also need us to think about what will happen when the wall falls. And whether it's, I'm talking the wall of a building, not just the Berlin Wall. Walls of buildings are much more in square meterage. The short point I would like to leave you with is that we will need to think this through. I would very much urge all of us to get together to start working on it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I've hijacked the agenda, but I thought I would put in my 2 pennies worth.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Dr. Mather. Truly inspirational as always. And luckily, we have 5 experts here today who have some keen insights on those exact questions you raised. So it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our panel, starting with Mate Heiss, Director Global Affairs from Solar Power Europe, Ravi Verma, Vice President from Avada, Shyam Rungta, founder of Regain Energies, Dave Rene, past president, ISES, International Solar Energy Society, and finally Shubha Raha, CEW. So firstly, thank you all for joining us today. We've already given this presentation, and so I don't think I need to make further opening remarks. So we'll jump straight into my questions for the panel. So Mate, obviously Europe is a leader in this space. I'd love to hear more about what's happening in Europe. What have the impacts been, and what's going on with different European companies in the recycling space?
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, AJ, for inviting us to this panel. Very important topic, of course. In Europe, we're working on sustainability, recycling, waste management, eco-design very much. So one of our priority topics. So in Europe, we have a European level directive legislation called the WEEE, or Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive, which regulates the management of electronic waste, including PV panels. And in my short intervention, I would like to focus on the business models related to waste management. So we heard in the intro presentation, I understood we were focusing more on the technical aspects, but I think that the business models and regulatory aspects for waste management, collection, recycling targets, etc., are also very important, because that's what will enable us to collect this waste and eventually, to send the waste into treatment facilities. And so the most effective, efficient approach to electronic waste management is the so-called EPR approach. EPR means extended producer responsibility. The term producer may be a bit misleading in this abbreviation, because it doesn't necessarily mean the entity that produces or manufactures the product, at least in the European context. But producer refers to the entity, the operator that places the product on the market. So extended producer responsibility means that whoever places the product on the European market must also or is also responsible for the collection and waste management or paying for the waste management. There are different financing schemes, but one of the most popular ones in Europe is going through so-called PROs, so producer responsibility organizations. These are associations that bring together producers, so companies that are placing solar panels on the market and which organize the waste management, the waste collection on behalf of these organizations. And actually, one of the main European producer responsibility organizations in the PV sector is PV Cycle. There are others as well, but PV Cycle is also a member of the Global Solar Council. I know their managing director, Jan Klinke, pretty well. He would have liked to be in this panel, but he wasn't able to make it to Dubai. But he can go on about, of course, about these types of financing schemes forever. And as a side note, let me also mention that together with PV Cycle and as Solar Power Europe, we're collaborating with NSCFI, the National Solar Energy Federation of India, and in the context of the EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership to develop business models and regulatory schemes for India for PV waste management. And maybe some of the key messages and recommendations that we already published in our reports, and I don't know whether our reports that we worked on as part of this EU-funded project were taken into account or considered as part of the ISA study. But some of the main recommendations include, of course, the consideration of the nature of solar PV waste as compared to other electronic waste. So other electronic waste, such as washing machines or fridges or phones, first, this is one of the main differences. First, they have a much shorter lifetime. A couple of years as opposed to solar panels, 25, 30 years. I would tend to disagree a little bit with what was mentioned in the intro presentation. So I don't think that PV panels will reach end of life much earlier than promised. So PV panels lifetime will, by experience, is lasting 25, 30 years, even more. Of course, repowering and replacing PV panels is a trend, but it doesn't. When a PV panel is replaced, it doesn't necessarily mean that the replaced PV panel will reach end of life. Of course, new business models will have to be considered for these panels that are being replaced. So apart from the lifetime, of course, also the fact that solar panels are not B2C, so business to consumer products, but B2B products, so business to business products, and also products that don't consume electricity like washing machines, but produce electricity. So that is why one of our main recommendations when developing regulatory frameworks for solar panels is to consider solar panels, but also other renewable energy products, a separate waste category, separate from the likes of washing machines or refrigerators. And so that's why it's really important to get your EPR legislation right. All these things needs to be taken into consideration when designing a regulatory framework and business models for solar panels. We heard about landfills, by the way. One of our imminent recommendations for countries that want to consider regulation and policies for solar PV waste management is to ban landfilling solar panels, because that is an issue. We have in Europe over 10 years of experience with PV waste management, and that is part of the WEEE directive that I was talking about. And we see an increasing interest in countries like India, but also Vietnam, Tunisia, South Africa, other countries in Latin America, looking into these types of legislation. And as Solar Power Europe, we are very happy to share our experience in Europe and work with partners, and also happy to work with the ISA on policy frameworks for PV panel waste legislation. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Mate. It's really great to be inspired by the example, particularly of companies like PV Cycle that are doing such great work. So with that, I'd like to turn to the India situation, and Ravi, you're from Avada, which is obviously one of India's leading developers. And 2 points I really want you to touch on is this question of EPR. So what is happening in India, And secondly, as Mate mentioned, solar panels generally last 25 years. But according to our friends at CEW, there's already been 285 kilotons of waste due to early losses. So what are you doing with the waste right now? That's already happened due to early losses.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks ISA and this NSFI for calling us for this event and expressing my views. What I would like to first say that Avada is one of the oldest solar power developer. We started with the capacity of 5 megawatt in the early stages, and we are the one which we have done 1250 megawatt single location project in Rajasthan. So, and what I would like to tell is that our government and our authorities are very conscious about this e-waste being generated by the solar PV panels. So, what I would like to say that our authorities, Ministry of Environment and Forest, they have already issued one notification last year in November, where how to manage this e-waste and how to recycle it. And this and the detailed guidelines are being framed by the CPCB, and they have already one guidelines draft are there. There will be a portal where everybody has to be registered. There will be monitoring of the waste. So it is not like that nothing has been done. We are very conscious about it. The thing is, we have to keep in mind that very few capacities has been done till like 205, 2015. Only around 6 gigawatt of capacity was put up till 205. And so this, as per the life cycle, yeah, there is a debate going on. How much our authorities, some would say it will may last 15 years, some may say 20 and 25. But what our manufacturers we have been imported, they have given a guarantee and warranty of 25 years, and even they say that it can even last more. So what we have been discussing with the authorities, that there can be some extension of PPAs after this lifespan of 25 years. Based on that only, these authorities with the government or with the private, we have been signing this power purchase contracts for, for 25 years. And secondly, I agree with respect to the recommendations which my colleague has just mentioned about this ban on landfills and this. Secondly, I would like to in India earlier. I think our developers, while making this business model, they have not considered the investments going into the managing of the e-waste after 25 years. So some model has to be worked out so that this whatever e-waste like mainly there are 2 or 3 elements which are very toxic and hazardous. So which we have to take care of. Other things can be reused or it's not that much of environmental impact on the human or wildlife. Next thing, like to mention that there can be some incentives for this management of e-waste. So, and many new technologies can be, I think, like my colleague, they have working on developing new technologies so that this e-waste can be reused, maybe for making new panels. As Dr. Mitra also told, we don't know what will happen after 25 years. So maybe this material which we are today thinking of is junk or it is of no use, it will be of valuable inputs. So this is I want to say. If any questions later on, I can respond to it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was actually just at a solar manufacturer, Vikram Solar, and they were saying they're extending warranties now to 28 to 30 years. So I certainly sympathize with that point. But just have you had any early breakage? What have you done with ones that have been damaged, or like what happens to them right now?
Because presently there is a hardly any damage. It is maybe into 0.1%, 0.05% breakage. And because we have been trained all our manpower to handle them very carefully while installing. Yeah, there might be more breakage during manufacturing, which my I think colleague will put more light on it. But as far as developers are concerned, we are very conscious. It is one of the precious and the most expensive item. As far as we are concerned, it results around 60 to 65% of total cost of the project. So we treat it like gold or diamond. So we cannot afford to lose the panel. And earlier, and we have been importing all the way from earlier Germany, Japan, now China. So It's not very easy. Yeah.
Did you have a very quick comment, Mate, before I move to Sham? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, indeed. I wanted to agree, of course, with the fact that there is that early breakage is a factor. According to our models, early breakage is, as you were saying, less than 1% of the total installations per year. However, early breakage and currently seen waste levels, waste streams cannot be compared to what we are expecting in 20 years or 30 years when panels that are being installed now and have been installed in the past couple of years will be reaching their end of life. So these are two completely different things. And also, referring back to what I was saying earlier, so the implications of solar PV being a different nature, a different kind of animal as compared to washing machines. So this has to be taken into account also when setting, for example, collection targets and recycling targets. Because in the case of washing machines, governments usually say, okay, you have to collect X%, let's say 80% of what is installed today. You have to collect and recycle today 80% of what is sold this year. This doesn't make any sense in the case of solar because what is installed this year will be reaching end of life in 20, 30 years time. So it is physically impossible to collect or recycle 80% of what is installed this year. So that's why governments are encouraged to be smart about setting collection targets, of course, as well. And also, we don't encourage governments to set 100% collection targets. You don't need to recycle 100% of the materials in solar panels. But when it comes to 80% or 70%, and then if you consider the weight of the solar panels, 80% of the solar panels weight is glass and in metals. And there are already glass and metals recycling facilities.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's a perfect segue now. Sham, I'd love to get your views. What are we already doing? What are you already doing at your company today? And what's your vision for the next? We'll get to the 30 years eventually, but what are you doing for the next 5 years? Let's say.
Firstly, thank you so much for the opportunity, everyone. With respect to what we guys are doing up, we are into recycling of PV panels. We have done some R&D in the segment since last past 2.5 years, a complete R&D facility. We did our pilot project 6 months ago, and it is running currently with 1,000 metric tons per year capacity, and we are already installing 6,000 metric tons per year capacity, which will be functional by March 24 within next 4 months. With respect to what my other colleagues have mentioned, from the developer's point of view, yes, less than 1% of breakage is happening. But imagine a scenario if less than 1% also of a 74 gigawatt install capacity only in India, still we are talking about a huge number of what is being as an early breakage. Even if that kind of material is going into the landfills, it is a huge task for the country to match its net goals of zero carbon, zero wastage, all of these goals which are set by the government of India and which we are aiming at. Even that amount affects it heavily. So with that aspect and with due respect to everyone, we guys are very much interested up in handling and to be named as um, reaching up that kind of level via R&D team that we recycle 100% of the panel and send everything, closing the whole loop as a circular economy business.
So just, when you say 100%, so I mean, I think a lot of people would understand. You've got aluminum frames, you've got glass, but can you break down, you know, how do you get to 100% in terms of
All right.
polysilicon, copper,
I'll,
silver,
I'll,
etc.?
I'll firstly a disclaimer. We guys are able to reach 98.6%. We are not yet 100%, 1.4, but the R&D team is doing up those pilot workings in which we might be able to reach 100% in the next couple of years, if not more. With respect to that, 75% of a solar panel, there are two kinds of solar panels which I'll consider. One is a 330 watt peak, and second would be a 540 watt peak panels, which I'm considering right now while sharing the data. A 22 kg panel, 75% is the glass, 9% of the weight is aluminium, 3% of the whole weight is almost silicon, which includes both from the cells as well as the silicon uh, adhesives which we guys use. 11.9% is the EVA and the plastic sheets which is installed in the panels, and rest 0.1% is all the precious metals which includes silver, lead, tin, etc. And 1% of the whole weight is copper. These are the major elements which we consider um, that is installed in a panel. We are able to extract almost everything, but on the end, when it comes to lead in the hazardous waste, that 0.1% area, and some amount of precious metal, which includes silver. These things, silver recovery is possible currently in our facilities also, but yes, not 100% of what is installed in that panel. We guys are doing R&D heavily. The team and scientist team at our factories are working day and night to operate and reach 100%. And we guys are actually willing that the resources which come in the country are interest. The company's vision statement is very simple, that whatever resource we are getting from the whole world to the country by importing panels, by any sort of data which we are not able to mine in our own country, we do not want those resources to exit without being utilized in our own. So we want to reach that 100% of whatever is coming inside the country should be utilized and stay in our country for the betterment of the economy. Thank you.
It's absolutely fantastic. 98.6 is a great number, and I think Mate was referring to percentage that are collected, which is also a challenge. But in terms of those sorts of recovery rates, it's fantastic to see your R&D team doing such great work. So with that, I'd love to turn to Dave to get your insights on what's going on R&D, around the world. What's the best in class technology? Can we do EVA backsheets? Can we do precious metals? What's going on?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. And I'm looking forward to, congratulations on this report. And I'm looking forward to volume 2, which I'm sure will be titled something like Waste to Watch or Waste Reborn or something like that. Because it's not just going to go to waste. It is going to get recycled. And I think, at the risk of repeating much of what Mate already said, I think we are looking at two kind of distinct issues here. One is reuse of panels that have been replaced for whatever reason but are still serviceable. And there's already quite a market for secondary use of solar panels. And we need to make sure that that market doesn't go away or is protected. But I think the bigger issue we're talking about here is just waste or how to recycle panels that have been damaged in some way or been are being recycled or renewed and with nothing, no source of market for the reused panels. And just for perspective, we've already got a terawatt, or more than a terawatt of solar PV installed already. And it's going up significantly fast. We're hoping to see it triple by the end of this decade, but for sure it's going up at a rate of 20 to 30% a year. And there are systems out there that have been working now for as much as 40 years, and we're going to see those eventually torn down and either uh, wasted or recycled in some, or resold in some other way or recycled. So I think when we look at the future projections of growth, we have to factor in the amount of panels that are being replaced due to natural disasters or to upgrades in the quality of the systems. And so so we are looking at that very significant problem. And when we look at the incentives being created around the world by governments. And I'll just mention the U.S., for example, with the IRA, the strangely titled Inflation Reduction Act, is stimulating significant growth in manufacturing and installation of PV in the U.S. and maybe even some foreign markets now coming from the U.S. So um, we have to make sure that we stay in front of this problem. And I saw a show on television just before I came over here. It's a documentary. It's a show, something like 60 Minutes, but I don't think it was exactly that one. But it was about how do we deal with electronic waste now? And they focused on this huge pile of electronic waste that's right outside of Dhaka in Ghana, I guess. Yeah, and with kids climbing through the piles, pulling out materials as best as they could. These are children, 12, 14 years old. Closer? Thank you. Okay, sorry. I don't need to repeat everything though. Okay. But this is a serious problem of how do we deal with electronic waste, and I think it's important for this community to get out in front of that problem now, and I'm really glad that we're doing that by having these discussions and writing these reports and seeing some industry coming up to handle this recycling problem, because I certainly don't want to be traveling to a country and see a pile of um, old PV panels with 12-year-olds climbing through them and trying to extract whatever they can out of the panels. So that's a very important uh, point to take this initiative. And I guess from the ISIS perspective, there's a lot of innovation still going on in PV. There's a lot of new materials that are going to become very important. We're hearing a lot about perovskites, for example. So I think we really have to focus on recycling as much as we can out of these systems. Some of these materials are going to become rare earth or are going to be rare earth materials that are going to be difficult to extract or from either through geopolitical or environmental considerations. So I just want, and I know ISIS through its journal, the Solar Energy Journal and Solar Energy Journal applications, there's a lot of researchers now that are coming up with research reports that are devising ways to more efficiently extract these materials at a lower cost so that they can be recycled. So those are my comments.
Thanks so much, Dave. It's really great to hear all this work going around, and thank you for your work in supporting this industry for so long. With that, I'd really like to look to Shuva. So CEW has done a lot of really fantastic work on this topic, a lot of great research. So what's next, both from the technology and economic side, but also from the regulatory side? How do we move forward?
Thank you. Um, I head new initiatives at the Council on Energy and Environment and Water. We're about 13 years old. It's a policy research institute, and it's about 300 people, of which about 230 are researchers. And I'm not one of those people. A lot of work has been done in this area by my colleagues who are very, very experienced in the science and the technology of solar and the panels. And we've heard from our experts or practitioners. I look at the political and the policy side of things, and a couple of things I want to share about that. So some of the technical challenges, I'm going to just quickly summarize what's come up over here from my co-panelists is that on the tech maturity of the collection process or the reclaim process and the proven feasibility of one physical collection, the cost of collection, etc., is a challenge. We have policy incoherence, subnational level, national level, and international level. So different people are doing RE at different phases, different paces of different technologies, different ways of deployment, different scales. So there's a lot of differential even within a country. I mean, India's a large country. Our states are very, very different in how they're deploying this. And a lot of it is left because of EPR to our industry to do it. They're kind of left to fend for themselves without a overarching support system that is, and then it becomes a factor of what is the company's resources that they can invest rather than a countrywide or institutional resources that are going into it. And the other thing that we have is the volume and the spread of resources because I mean they're not just in India. And this is where I kind of talk a little bit about the global value chain aspect or the global circular economy of any resource. Our objective at CEW, for example, is to look into the use, reuse, and misuse of resources because that can be done with any resource. So when you look at an energy system like the renewable energy system or the solar energy system, and ISA is absolutely in the middle of that. If you, let's say, do a one world, one sun, one grid, then you are not restricted to a geography, and then you're all over the world, and you're not just your solar PV, your wiring and your everything is all over the world. And then a body such as an ISA becomes essential to sort of look at the taxonomy of how each of these countries is defining each element of a panel. You have to look at harmonizing of standards. Dr. Mathur, in fact, spoke right now of that if all of us don't talk the same language, then we cannot solve this at a global because all your parts are not indigenous and all your parts are not always in the same geography. Many things cross borders multiple times. And that also requires harmonization at every step. The third thing that comes into this place is when we talk to between countries, and I was part of the team that advised the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change for the G20, where they came up with the resource efficiency and circular economy industry coalition. And that was something that we worked very hard to get through to the G20. What happens with that is privacy of countries or the sovereign borders of countries or the tracking of parts between countries is something that we have not agreed to, not just for solar panels. For every country, that's a security issue. that whether you are doing a dumping of resources from one country to another, especially where things have to be reclaimed or there is some sort of waste collection or waste management, which is what you are saying, that who is processing the waste. There is a security issue to that. There's a security issue to parts being tracked across borders. So that has to be looked at. Then the other thing is that we're also looking at a collective way of upstream changes rather than downstream processing, because that's expensive. And I have a question, in fact, for the panel, if you allow me, and I'll come to that, is the cost of decommissioning. I mean, when we say EPR or whatever, it's basically you're decommissioning a power plant, whether it's a coal plant or a gas plant or a solar plant. Is this thing built into the plant cost if you're doing EPR? So then that's a project cost that is built in, even if you're going to pay that out 25 years later, because you're decommissioning those things. And one of my jobs, because I'm part of the foresight team of the CEO, is to do the thing that Dr. Mathur said, that the world of 25 years later will not look like today. So how do you predict with the reality of today? Let's say India 2047 is a mission we have from our country, but we have net zeros of various countries at 2050, 2060. India's net zero is 2070. So how do we predict materials, laws, geopolitics between countries, who's talking to whom, where is the money flowing from, who's funding the solar project, does that person want to take the responsibility for decommissioning the solar project? So these are studies that we need to do beyond the technological studies. The RECIC that we have set up with the G20, for example, something like that needs to overlap with something like an ISA for a very specific solar focus, because the circular economy and resource is a broader topic. We did it for steel, we've done it for bioeconomy, we can do it for solar, but that is where the global challenges will come in. So if a China is exporting panels, and I'm not talking about India, let's say Germany is buying the panels and then we're decommissioning all of that someplace in Africa or India, wherever, that's the value chain that has to be deconstructed for you. And that's where we are. So my question is the cost of decommissioning something you're taking into account? And another question I had,
Let's do one at a time. Ravi,
okay.
I'd love to get your view on that. Like, do you have a team? Do you have a cost? Do you how do you pay for this, or how do you account for this cost?
Yeah, I think most of the developers, they have not taken into cognizance the cost of decommissioning, because don't think, because they have just taken the O&M cost, because I think because these regulations have come little later, so there might be some change in law or something, so that they can claim from the off-takers, because at that point of time when this our projects were signed or commissioned, this cost of decommissioning was not taken into account.
Fair enough. Thank you. You had a second question though? Go ahead.
Question for him, because he's actually doing the work. Sham, have you come across this global value chain challenge in the work that you're doing of the
Yes,
deconstruction?
we are facing it. In that, what happens is when a developer installs up a panel, post the panels installed, a time period of 10 years or 5 years, as per the power purchase agreement between the government and the developers end. Uh, in the current scenario, with the change in technology, the upgradation has to be done on that particular area. With respect to the income as a business, from the business aspect, the person has to replace those panels with a better tech in order to generate better recovery of his investments. So in order to that, the panels which are decommissioned from those kind of areas, those kind of projects, those panels are considered as B grade panels for certain other lower economies, which are like we can say the African subcontinent, or areas where those panels can still generate certain amount of power, which is enough for them at a much lower cost rather than installing up a fresh panel. So these guys sell those particular panels to an X person. The X person exports it to those other countries, stating as a panel. Then post the B grade use, which is happening in other economies, which are the lower sides, those panels get landfill dumped in those economies itself, and that is creating up a problem in which, as I said in my earlier part, I want those resources to stay in India so that we can at least reuse it to make up something new. As we all know, cells manufacturing has already been initiated. A lot of other companies are building up everything. So the dependency on certain other countries for importing any X material, India want to be self-reliant, self-built. So that Made in India campaign has pushed it to that level that we need resources and we are able to reuse that resources to make something else also, if not solar panel.
Yeah, so I had a question actually for Dave or Sham, or maybe even Mate has some thoughts on this. In terms of the costs, so let's say a panel is 20 cents a watt peak or 15 rupees a watt peak. Now, when it reaches end of life, there's going to be a cost of processing, but there's also going to be a benefit. You're going to recover some silver, you're going to recover some aluminum, you're going to have some value out of these recycled products. So my question is, what percentage are we? Is this 1 cent a watt peak? Is it half a cent per watt peak? Is it 5 cents a watt peak? What is the cost of end of life? And how close are we to getting the point where the value recovered is equal to the cost of processing?
So on my side, I'm afraid I can't comment on the cost and the profit from the of the end of life or the waste management. What I can do is offer some insights on the business model and how this is financed, how the collection is financed in Europe. So in Europe, the EPR legislation, the WE directive, says that the collection has to be financed by the producer. So those who place the product on the market. This can be done in multiple approaches. So there are different approaches to this. Either, and as you were saying, you were asking the question: Do you already pay today for a cost that will happen in 20 years or 30 years? This is potential. Like in principle, this is an approach, but no one is really doing this because it's very difficult to predict. Also, it would entail very large amounts of payments because there will be a lot of waste in 20, 30 years time. So what most PROs, producer responsibility organizations, are doing in Europe today is collect fees that cover the collection of today's waste. So the fee that you are paying per watt for all the panels that are placed on the European market, so the total amount from that will cover the waste management for today's waste. Yeah. So they are not collecting for the future; they are collecting for today and the next couple of days. So this is how it works. And then in terms of the fee, so every time a panel is sold in Europe, there is a fee in there, a waste management fee. It can be either visible. Usually, we recommend that it's visible so that everybody knows and it's transparent how much it is. Unfortunately, since I'm not Jan Klinke, I don't know how much it is right now. But it's something that is visible in countries, for example, like Belgium. In other countries, it's not necessarily visible. That is the amount that is collected by these PROs, like PV Cycle. They have a separate account for that, and that's the money they are using to collect any waste. So it is really important to emphasize this, that they don't only collect waste from their current members or companies that are placing products on the market right now. These EPR legislation and producer responsibility organizations have to cover and make sure that every type of solar waste is collected, even waste that we refer to as orphan waste, waste that don't have the manufacturers yet anymore around. So orphan waste is covered as well. It means that anybody who has a PV panel that has reached end of life or broken or early breakage, etc., anyone can call PV Cycle and say, hey, here, I have a broken PV panel. Can you collect it? PV Cycle will come, collect it, and then bring it to the waste treatment facility.
Okay, so before I move to Sham and Dave on the cost, what percentage in Europe is collected roughly?
So in Europe, there is a collection target of about, if I remember correctly, 75, 80%. However, PV panels are in the same category as washing machines and other electronic waste. So it means that in reality, I think the collection share of PV panels is maybe less or maybe more than 80%. And what matters ultimately from the legislation's point of view is that the overall collection share of that category, which includes PV panels and other types of electronic waste, it reaches or surpasses at least 80%.
Yeah, before you go, I just want to one intervention here. I would just like to tell that, like in India, more than 90% is of a crystalline models, which are, and it has the metals like silver, copper, silica, lead, and there are multiple use of these elements when once they are extracted, and we don't know what will their value after 25 years. Like I just draw a parallel, like in coal-based thermal projects, there is a ash after burning of coal. So there was a fly ash and the bottom ash both. It is, we have to earmark certain big area to dump those because there were no off takers. Now that with the technology, lot of this fly ash is being used for making uh, bricks and other items which can be used in roads. And earlier, this power projects developers, they used to pay so that somebody can pick up and take away those fly ash. And presently, the cement manufacturers, the road manufacturers, they come, they pay and take away those. So we just hope that all these precious metals like gold, you pay a lot of money to extract from its ore. So the silver, aluminum, these are all precious metals. And the cost of metallurgy is nowhere going to be lower than what it is today. So so it will be a very profitable business. What I can foresee in the future. So it will not be a waste. It will be a might be a gold mine or diamond mine for the person who is recycling it. Now, in like if we like we segregating the waste in our household, in our colonies, people are paying. Will come and collect you. Please don't give it free of cost to others because they are making waste to energy.
Yes. All right. Well, that's my question for Sham. How close are we to
Yeah.
the point where people are paying you, where you can actually pay for the waste as opposed to having to be paid to take the waste?
In that particular aspect, as compared to the financial aspects what we are discussing, firstly, right now in current scenarios, yes, waste is available from the landfill areas, from the sites which are kept up like on sideways on the sites. It's just lying down. It's not being treated, not being used, neither being segregated, nor being processed. Nothing is happening to those files. And as per the EPR guidelines from the country government of India, uh, the producers, the manufacturers, the EPR guidelines states that till 2034, 2034, the panels are supposed to be stored, and that's on the responsibility of the manufacturer and the developers end, whosoever is the first person importing it in the country. That's the first aspect. And during that storage, imagine if in case till 2034 we are storing that amount of panels. It's gonna be storage is a cost, land is itself a cost, and we cannot let that particular panel stay away in landfills. The areas are going to get hazardous, the land is going to get soiled, the areas, everything is going to get hazardous waste is going to penetrate deep inside. Instead of that, when we are able to procure those panels and process it in our industry factories, the cost of process is currently being matched with the amount of collection, the cost of collection, the cost of processing, recovery is happening by selling those materials outside in the economy. But as soon as the 100% of those circular economy is reached, we are able to extract that 1.4%, which is the precious metal areas. We might be able to achieve what Mr. Ravi is saying here, that it might turn out to be a gold mine.
Fantastic.
Right now, it is a level game. It is not something that we can foresee with 98.6% recovery that we might earn a great amount. But yes, that 1.4% holds a great amount of value. Reason being two things. One, we'll stop up the mining. It will be the urban mining method in which we recycle and reuse those products in the economy. And secondly, yes, with the increase in mining, the cost of those materials are obviously going to get higher with time.
Yeah.
So that's it.
And Dave, this is where I'd love you to come in to provide the international perspective, both on today's technologies and like, does this change if we start using perovskites, for example, or what's it look like in the future?
Well, it just adds the new complications to the discussion that we're already having. I can't really add too much to what we've already said, but I think one area we could look into is what work that NREL has done, the U.S. National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They do a lot of life cycle cost estimates on topics just like this. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of results they've been coming up with. And I guess and also one point I wanted to make is that it makes me think about these net zero and 100% renewable energy scenario studies that are being done by IEA and IRENA and others. To what extent are they able to factor in, or how do they come up with numbers that factor into the total investments required to achieve 100% renewables or net zero? Because clearly, when I don't think this is an insignificant factor that should be avoided. I think the recycling and the value derived from the recycling really has to be included in this, because otherwise you may be clearly overstating what a 100% renewable energy world is going to cost, and we don't want to make that mistake.
Well, and this is perhaps a good time to turn to you, Shiva, because I mean, your CEW's estimate, I think, is something like 6,000 gigawatts of solar just for India alone to achieve net zero by 2070. Um, what are we going to have 6,000 gigawatts? I don't know how many kilotons that is, but we're going to have a mountain of solar waste, and it'll be the new world's tallest peak.
We have some interesting peaks in India, as you know, of the garbage heap that we already have outside Delhi. And but to kind of seriously come back to this, I'm not even looking at 2070. If we add our hydrogen target by 2030, the 5 MTPA that we have, we're looking at another 125 gigawatts of solar or renewables that's supposed to feed. So we're already looking at 750. I mean, it's almost 1,000 gigawatts there. So what we need, to my mind over here, is we'll have to pull in investment, and this is a risk. So this is an industry risk, because what happens is if you're not able to manage your waste, and then we can have emissions guidelines come in, we can have waste management penalties come in, and if such an external risk comes into the renewable energy industry or solar industry, it can collapse the industry's viability commercially. So we need to address this both as an investment opportunity, because obviously there is some sort of new industries coming out of this. And what happens to then and I'll also map the risk to the existing industries if the punitive measures come into creating waste. And then the third thing that ISA, I think, probably should take a lead in is what we call creating a rules-based architecture, where the management of this, at least within a group of countries, follow standardized rules. And we are doing that now with MNRE, for example, and the Quad, and we did it with G20 for hydrogen, because that's another new industry that's coming up, and we don't want to make the same mistakes that we've done with fuels of the past, with coal or with oil, or now we're having so much problem aligning our decommissioning process of that or managing the supply chains of that. So if you don't do it right now for solar, and then 6,000 gigawatts with us, and overall maybe 100,000 gigawatts are in play in the world, then who is governing this? So the governance mechanism for new industries that may come up, new resources that may be used, new ways of using those resources, we have to kind of work on that aspect in parallel to the technological research that is going on in this area.
Well, thanks so much, Shiva. And I think, as part of the ISA's transforming solar supply chains, which we're doing in collaboration with ARENA and the STEM Secretariat, this is perhaps an issue we can take up. Mate, you also wear a hat as the Global Solar Council. Are there any international standards, international definitions, international guidelines, or is it just this is part of e-waste, or do we have something special for solar?
So I will keep my Solar Power Europe hat on, because even as Solar Power Europe, we do international work on this. As mentioned, we are working, for example, one of our most important partner countries is India. And I'm going to be very happy to share our recommendations for solar PV waste policy and business models with all of you, because we have some interesting recommendations. And actually, we are also working with the MNRE together with the EU delegation to put forward recommendations. And maybe we should join forces on this. And I know that many countries around the world are looking at Europe, because Europe has this over 10 years of experience with electronic waste legislation, which includes and covers PV panels as well. And we have some interesting lessons learned there, and we want this legislation to change. Some of the examples are the ones that I mentioned in the beginning, that we think, PV panels and renewable energy products should have a separate waste category, not together with washing machines. That is one of our main recommendations. But I wanted to comment on some of the previous discussions, such as the profitability of PV waste management and recycling, which we don't really see yet. But I think that, so on the one hand, waste management and waste recovery's profitability will come with scale. And I think that in 20, 30 years time, this will probably, and this has to turn into a profitable business, because we will have so much waste. And hopefully, as some of the other panelists were saying, we will be able to reuse the silicon from PV panels to produce new PV panels, or the glass from PV panels to produce new PV panels. But this is not possible yet technologically. So you can reuse and recover the glass, the solar glass from PV panels, and make glass, like drink water glasses out of it, or vases and stuff like that. But you can't reuse it for solar glass, like for PV panels. Same goes for silicon. I was having a conversation with Wacker, one of the largest polysilicon manufacturers, recently, and they told me that there is no way to reuse polysilicon recovered from PV panels to produce new PV panels. So that is why I'm saying that on the one hand, we need scale, but on the other hand, we also need new manufacturing technologies. We know new.
Say no way or no way yet?
No way.
I was working on it with.
Exactly. And I think that governments have to play a role in this. And in Europe, we have some initiatives around this, eco design and recyclability. So upcoming regulation on encouraging recyclability, eco design, etc. Of PV panels. And that's what we're working on. So hopefully, and I also know some startups that are working on establishing easier easier recyclable PV panels, which will also contribute to the profitability in the end, because you will have to invest less to recover more. And I think that that is something that the Global Solar Council, we as the solar industry, are very happy to join forces on with our Indian partners.
Well, fantastic. I mean, I think we're just about out of time, but we've got enough time left. If people have kind of closing remarks or final thoughts they wanna get in, um, Ravi or Sham, go ahead.
So I would like to just recommend what I earlier told, that there should be a complete ban on the minefields to be used as recycled, and more R&D should be done to recycle. As I agree, it may not, the glass may not be used for the people, but there are multiple uses of these such materials like aluminium, copper. There are other uses where it can be utilized, mainly not only for to manufacture PV panels itself. And so I just all over the scientific community, so that they can more research work and make this, as we get more and more waste, so there is scale will be available. So this is a blessing in disguise itself, so that it can be become more. When scale is available, then the economy of recycling and reuse of wastage will also will be there. So I'm always positive and think positively, so that with the latest technology, newer new unicorns coming up like Sham, and then we'll have a fantastic world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ravi. Go ahead, Sham.
Thank you so much. I would like to have certain recommendations with respect to CEW, ISA, DSS Plus, and other all such organizations who are into policy making, to suggest and try to implement these certain policies and regulations, so that we can have clear recycling standards and provide certain incentives to recycling programs, be it of any kind, so that that particular products, particularly the PV modules, enter up to the recycle, they land to the recyclers in a created way, rather than entering up the landfills, then we guys are collecting all of that stuff. Secondly, technological innovations are highly recommended. It is not just me or two. There will be not one company like me or 10 companies like me. There will be hundreds of us who will be required to reach that 100% goal of getting every panel recycled in the economy, which might take time, which is difficult, I'm pretty sure, but it might happen. It can happen if everyone is willing to. Thirdly, consumer education is also an important aspect in this, in which, in case if we are able to educate regarding what exactly is the waste, it is hazardous, it is better to get it recycled, it is better not to send it to the landfill. And in case if we are able to get this consumer education done, it will be helpful not today, but for the future as well.
Thanks so much. Go ahead, Shiva.
No, I just want to build on something that he said about the consumer education, because one of the things we're assuming right now is utility scale decommissioning. When you go to rooftop and everybody is discarding their solar panel in their literal garbage, and what you said about will we see a mountain or mountains of solar garbage, NIMBY can become a, like not in my backyard. NIMBY can very, very quickly completely disrupt good ideas. So the moment the general public starts seeing this waste piling up in their literal backyard, and with the exponential growth of solar, you'll see this happening very quickly. Then the benefits of renewable energy versus the detriment of waste and a social narrative can very quickly weaken political will to deploy more renewable, because the pressure will be on the local politician to clean up the neighborhood, and then you're losing a narrative battle. So it's also important, the consumer education, I would say ecosystem education, like this cannot be a secret conversation or an expert conversation. It needs to be sort of socialized, so everybody's anticipating this is going to happen, and then it's mental preparedness to also recycle, or even do a design change at the upstream level, or demand that politicians plan in advance for where this waste is going to be or what economy of collection they plan to have.
Dave, do you have a final word?
Well, not too much other than to thank you again for putting together this panel. I think from the research perspective, this is an important area. I think it's good for ISIS to be hearing these kinds of feedback, because I think it's gives us ideas on how to go out and approach our researchers and try to encourage more work to be done and get published in our journals, because I really think this is an evolving issue. I'm trying to figure out how much PV has actually been manufactured since the original solar cell back in 1954, and it's probably 2 or 3 times as much as what's currently installed. So there's already a lot out there that we probably missed the opportunity on. So let's not miss any more. Let's just really make this a dedicated.
Well, thank you so much, and a lot of fantastic insights here. As Dr. Mather said, we all know that this problem is going to be massive, and so it's so great to hear about some of these potential solutions. So with that, I'd like to invite my colleague Ramesh Kumar to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Is it working? Yeah. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for a wonderful discussion. I think, yeah, wonderful discussion of very important topic. I think we have less people here because people have not understood the gravity of the situation. Probably we are still much away from the important issue of recycling. We think that there is a life of solar panels, or maybe especially the main solar panels, for 25 years, and so there is a long way. But I think it's very important to think about it at this stage. We started to build up the very important policies, because I think most of the time this is subsumed as part of the e-waste, whereas this requires a very specific intervention from the policymakers. Uh, Looking at I mean, coming to the report ISA has made, thank the DSS for assisting ISA, and this is also sponsored by UNEP for us. They have, in partnership with ISA, we have brought out this report. This report is basically to what we have covered, only the Indian experience, and so I mean, this is only a one step, I think, which we need to do much more on that. I'm also putting 1 or 2 points, because I have been associated with this solar, what is happening in India for many years. I know of the and Mr. He was there in all along. Mr. Verma was there. In the initial phase of 5 to 6 years, if we started our journey in India, it was mainly on the thin film technologies. So, which may be requiring the kind of replacement, and maybe the silicon part of the solar panels, the cost has reduced much. Now the thin film technology is almost very negligible, maybe less than 5% or so. So that is one thing which is there, which also talks about there will be a lot of changes in the coming days, more different technologies or more efficient panels coming into the market. So I think the landscape will keep on changing. So there cannot be a one methodology to address all these things. Um, And secondly, I'm also looking at many of some of the recyclers were telling good news. They were telling up to 90% it can be reclaimed. That's a very important input for us and gives a lot of confidence on that. But then I think we require to work more on this. And so thank you for a wonderful panel here. I will also like to mention the two important people who have been from our side, other than UNEP and the DSS were there. The two important people who have been working is one Mr. Sabha Kalam, he is not here, and one Mr. Nar Bahadur also. These are the two very key people involved in this getting this report. And so we could launch it, but it's just a beginning. So many thanks for all the panelists for that launching this report. Many thanks.
I think we do have gifts for the Shama. Yes, I want these. Yes. She's representing the team today. I know.